What's going on, guys? It's Rylan with Rylan's Amazing Photography, and as you know, the D6 has recently been announced, and today we're going to be going over the reality of the D6, which means it's completely truthful, no biased opinion here. This isn't sponsored by Nikon or anything. I wish this video was sponsored by Nikon, but no, it's not. Anyways, this is going to be the reality about the D6, and I'm going to be giving you all the information that you need to know about the D6 before it's released in April. Before we get into today's video, I want to remind you guys to go down below and like today's video. While you're down there, you might as well go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a video. I upload on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, so definitely make sure that you stick around for those uploads. Without further ado, let's get right into the video. I'm just going to start this off by saying I don't think the D6 is ready. If tomorrow something happened, Nikon said we're going to release the D6, it's not ready. I think that Nikon people are scrambling for the due date in April. That's when the pre-orders are supposed to ship out, and people will start to get their D6s in April. I don't think they're anywhere near ready. I think Nikon staff is struggling to meet these deadlines for the camera. I think they still have some firmware updates and some other stuff that I'm sure they're working on, and I can see that becoming a problem. Let me also just say this: do not pre-order this camera. Don't do it. I don't care if I don't care. Don't pre-order the camera. Wait till it gets into the hands of YouTubers, professional photographers that can review the camera and give you an unbiased opinion on the camera. Because if you go and pre-order this camera, there might be some major defect or some huge problem with the camera that you wouldn't be aware of because Nikon didn't inform you of that, obviously. So just don't pre-order the camera no matter what you do. Just please don't do that, because it could hurt you and your money, because $6,500 is not a cheap camera. I want to point out that this camera is not for amateurs, which means amateurs would not find this camera very useful. If you're starting right now with a beginner DSLR, let's say a D3500 or a D5600, you're not going to find the D6 useful. It's just not the type of camera. Professionals, people that have been shooting for years, and people that have been using professional DSLRs and mirrorless cameras will find this camera useful. Probably not the everyday amateur that's been shooting. Let's get into the specs. The D6 can do 14 frames per second in the viewfinder. It can do 10.5 frames per second in live view, which means when you're looking on the back screen of the camera and you're holding it up, you can get 10.5 frames per second with that. When you're looking through the viewfinder, you can get 14 frames per second. You can do silent shooting with the D6 in live view, which means if you're at some kind of special press conference or something where the shutter click on the camera just simply would not be good, some kind of important meeting, you would have to hold the camera up and look through the live view screen, but you could get 10.5 frames per second in silent shutter mode. The Nikon D6 is supposed to be one of the most indestructible and reliable cameras that there is on the market. However, with them making this possible, it means that they're going to have to cut things. Something that I do want to point out is the IBIS. We're not getting that IBIS that people expected originally on NikonRumors.com. They thought that we were going to be getting image stabilization within the camera, but that's not something that Nikon's offering on the D6, which is kind of bad considering that a lot of their other cameras have it that they've been working on recently. So we really expected that for the D6, but it's not going to happen. Personally, I think the D6's autofocus system will be unreliable for moving subjects. If you're sitting and you're shooting a still subject, I don't think it's going to be that much of a problem. But Nikon hasn't really bragged about their autofocus system for the D6. If the D6 was going to have some crazy good autofocusing system, I think that Nikon would be bragging about it and they would be using that in their marketing, which we haven't really seen. We've seen that it's supposed to be a better autofocus system than what we've seen in previous cameras, but I'm not sure that it's going to be some extreme good thing for fast-moving subjects and such, because they haven't really advertised it as that. They've just said better autofocus system. What that means, we don't know. It might be worse. When you purchase a camera, you're kind of wanting to know the video these days. So the camera has 4K video with 30 frames per second, and the reason I'm pointing this out is because that's not an upgrade at all from the D5. The D5 can also shoot 4K with 30 frames per second. Back in 2015, 2016, I think this would have been very beneficial and people would have been excited about this, but it's 2020. People aren't as excited about 4K and 30 frames per second. That's something that we've seen for a few years now. I don't think this camera is focused at all towards the video. I think it will get the job done if you're out on assignment and you need to shoot a video also, because that's a huge demand with photographers these days. People want to hire the same person to do their still images and video, because video is becoming just as popular and more popular than still images. So as I said, this camera can do 4K 30 frames per second. It's got the 1.5 crop that most Nikon cameras do have. It can also do 1080p at 60 frames per second. The D6 comes at a price point of $6,500, which is a lot for a camera. But when you're looking at video capabilities that I just talked about, that is very expensive if you're getting this camera for video, especially when there's cheaper cameras like the Nikon D780 and the Nikon Z6. They are much cheaper than the D6 and they have a lot better video capabilities than what the D6 is going to have. This might not be a huge factor in purchasing the camera, but I felt like it was worth mentioning that, like the Canon 1DX Mark III, that the Nikon D6 is going to have 2 CFX card slots. The camera has 105 autofocus points, which is actually down from the D5 having 155. This doesn't mean that you can autofocus in 105 places, rather that means you have 105 selectable autofocus points in the viewfinder. There's obviously more on the back of the live screen. Something else that I thought was worth pointing out is that the D6 allows for some weird autofocusing groups, which is something that I've never really seen before, and I don't think that it's going to be any huge help. We've been used to the group autofocus with many other cameras, but as you can see here, it's just a kind of a row of autofocusing points, which is really strange in my opinion, and I think it's really weird, honestly. I'm not sure that that's going to be helpful for a professional photographer or any kind of photographer at all. The D6 has 3 million ISO. This was something that we also seen in the D5, but it's rare and it's pretty impressive, so I'll give them that. Now I want to take the time to address a remark that I've heard a lot in researching this video. It should be the Nikon D5S and not the Nikon D6. Do I agree with you? Possibly. I think it probably should be the Nikon D5S because we're not used to not getting a huge upgrade when you're going from a D5 to D6. When we seen the upgrade from the D4 to the D5, we had some dramatic improvements in those two camera bodies. When there was a D4S in between it, it's kind of like, here's this camera, there's not any huge upgrades. It's not a necessity for you to get this, but here it is, we're putting it out. The D6, I'll tell you exactly why I think they did this, and that's because Nikon is losing money. They're actually losing more money than they are gaining on camera sales and just profits in general. So I think that's exactly why they've named this camera the D6 rather than the D5S. Like I said, typically there would be some massive improvement in this camera, but there's not. So they're just calling it the D6, so those reliable Nikon buyers are going to come up and see, oh, it's a D6. They're going to immediately think this is a huge upgrade from camera body to body, and they're going to go ahead and purchase it when truly there's not that many upgrades, and it should most likely be called the D5S and not the D6 at all. So the main points I want you to take away from this video are the Nikon D6 is going to come in at a price point of $6,500. It's capable of 14 frames per second from the viewfinder and 10.5 frames per second when you're shooting in live view. It has improved autofocus, although they haven't really marketed it and made it like a huge big deal that it's got a much better autofocus system. They do say that it's improved, so we'll see that once the camera comes out if it's truly that much better. The camera has 4K video with 30 frames per second. If you're getting a camera for video, probably not recommending the D6 when you can get much cheaper cameras like the Nikon D780 and the Z6 that is much cheaper. It obviously has the 1.5 crop for the video. The Nikon D6 has better weather sealing than the D5 according to reports. It should be much better as far as weather sealing goes. If you're out in the rain or the snow and it's really cold, it's not a big deal. The D6 also has a 200 buffer JPEG file form, which means when your files are buffering after you've taken a ton of photos, it's gonna have a maximum 200 JPEG buffer system, and it's supposed to be a really fast clear, so it's not going to be like you sit there and wait for 20 minutes for your buffer to clear, because I know there are some other cameras that it will take it a while to clear the buffer out. In conclusion, the D6 is clearly a disappointment. even though this is the case, they can still charge as much as Canon is charging for the 1DX Mark III. And that's because there's a reliable Nikon customers that are going to be buying this camera anyways. And that's because they already have too much money invested in Nikon to go and switch to another company such as Sony. They're going to be purchasing Nikon products because they've just invested thousands of dollars into them over the years. So I think this camera is more focused and marketed towards people who are already in the Nikon industry and people who are using the D5 often. I think it's more marketed toward them because it's not a huge camera that people should be completely excited about. Everything I said in this video is straight up facts. I'm not lying. It's not biased in any way. Like I said, Nikon has not sponsored this video. I would really appreciate it if you would go down below and like the video, and while you're down there, go ahead and subscribe. I have videos like this all of the time. In fact, you might be interested in watching another video that I did on why Nikon is failing, which I think is part of the reason they're charging this outrageous amount for the D6. What are your thoughts on the D6? Do you like it? Are you going to buy the D6? Write that down below in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys Sunday, and I hope you guys have an amazing day.